Brewster here with a new episode of Chordplay. This is the Chords of Badlands, and of course we're going to be talking about Jake E. Lee again, and I've had requests to feature more of Jake's music, and if you search around on my channel, you'll find the original Chords of Jake E. Lee Chordplay episode. That was over 4 years ago. Also 2 3-for-alls looking at some of Jake's licks, and now we're going to return to Jake's music looking at his group Badlands, which is a legendary band for sure. Badlands formed in LA in 1988, which was after Jake was fired from Ozzy Osbourne's band. And for a long time, I never actually got the dirt or the scoop as far as what happened. And then eventually I read, what had happened with Ozzy and Sharon and Jake E. Lee. And they fired Jake, but they didn't tell him. And then I think a roadie or a guitar tech eventually told Jake, like, hey, I think you're fired. Jake called Sharon. Sharon verified, like, yes, you're fired. And then, of course, I couldn't believe the way they treated Jake, because technically, Bark at the Moon and Ultimate Sin were, Ozzy's albums, returning to studio albums. Speak of the Devil, the live album with Brad Gillis, is really important. But, Bark at the Moon was the studio album, that Ozzy issued after Randy died. And I just couldn't believe the way he treated his band at that time. It's like, man, he saved your butt, dude. But, they treated him like an employee, which is awful. And, of course, Badlands, came out. They released 3 albums. 2 of those were official. Their 3rd album, Dusk, actually was recorded, demos from 92 to 93, and it wasn't released until 1998, which was 5 years later. That's a great overlooked album. And of course we have the late great, Ray Gillen vocalist, and of course Jake E. Lee and the guitar, duties. A phenomenal band, legendary for sure, even though they just have a little limited, window of music. But definitely great stuff. So the music and chord-based ideas in this episode came from 3 Badlands albums, and like I just mentioned, they've released 3 albums, so we're going to take a look at some music from each one. And definitely, Jake's notoriously known for these interesting chord twists and rhythmic hiccups and stretchy chords and just unusual things on the guitar. And he does do traditional things or kind of more common moves and ideas, but seemingly he always throws in some kind of hiccup or a change or something unusual, a little twist somewhere. And that makes his music and guitar playing very interesting, because you never really know what he's going to do until he does it. So anyway, just a heads up. With the opening, that's Dreams in the Dark from the first Badlands album, and it's something like this. Quick hammer on A to B and then a D power chord to an E, like that. Then you want to hit that E power chord again with the low E open. And then this quick slide E to F sharp and then form a B power chord right there and move to A. Like that. And the second time you kind of hit that A different. It's E sus4 to E major, like that. Then you start scratching. And then this B to D power chord, and you hear some vibrato on that D. And then do that E sus4 E major move again. So right there, you're going to play that that twice, there's technically a guitar solo right there, and then the verse starts, and you're going to do that 4 more times. And right there, it's a C major 7 like this. Think of like that C power chord, but play the B and the high E open, strum it, and then kind of pick through it. And then an A sus2 the same way. And then back to that C major 7, you're going to strum it and kind of strum like through the chord. And then right there, it's a B sus4 like this. So kind of strum the chord like the B5 or the B power chord. And then start on that D string and pick all the way up. Like that. And then you hear it kind of slid off and then just goes into an E5 into the next part of the song. Dreams in the Dark's a great song. Definitely one of the most, kind of recognizable or well-known of Badlands music. A great one. Next up's the song Ball and Chain, the last track from the first Badlands album, and this one kicks ass like this. Something like that, so it keeps going, but it starts with that really obnoxious, like, single note riff, like this. Into that E, and then you're kind of walking down like the E blues scale, grab that flat 5 there. That's the first pass of that riff. And then do the same thing. Bend this A kind of up a half step, and then an F sharp power chord to an E. And then do it again. And then right there, hit this Hendrix chord E7 sharp 9 and slide it off. And you start the verse right there. So it's like a funky A to a funky B single notes, and then a funky D to a D power chord slid to C sharp, like that. And then you're going to start this G sharp A to B kind of funkified, and then this single E to a D power chord, and start it again, and start on the G sharp instead of the Hendrix chord like this. Do that same slide, D to C sharp 5, and then the last time it's right there, so it's single E to a D sharp. So that's a really interesting progression, and this is some of those Jake E. Lee chord twists I was talking about during the intro, like this. And then all of that's repeated, and then you hear another guitar that's overdubbed. You might have noticed I was using the MXR clone looper there. So there's 2 guitars. One's doing that. Then you hear this other one do this kind of Van Halen thing. Like an E, like E over B, and it's heavily palm muted, and then a D over A, heavily palm muted, and then end on that B, and that's what you're hearing there, and it fits perfectly with that other riff. Definitely keep your eye on Jake, because he does stuff like that all the time. Next up's the song 3 Day Funk from the album Voodoo Highway, and like the title suggests, this is super funky, like this. doing this B to C sharp to E to the low E open as far as that first little riff. Like that. And then think of an E9, but we're not doing the full chord, we're just grabbing the top part, you know, like the G, B, and high E. Like that. And then you're going to answer that with this. So do E to F sharp, B to the low E open. And like that. And then it's part of an E13. Grab that C sharp right there. And then do it again. And right there, occasionally you hear that E13 moved to an E7. Just move that C sharp to D like that, and then do it again. Occasionally you hear the E13 to E7, E13 to E9, like that. So just think of anything super funky, funkadelic, James Brown, the Chili Peppers, whatever you need to think of, and just funk it out. Next up's the song Sun Red Sun from the album Dusk, and this song totally reminds me of The Cult. It has that feel and that sound. It sounds like The Cult big time. And also there's an interesting thing happening with delay here, and I love when guitar parts do this, where you hear the delay is kind of part of the riff, like this. Technically, I'm hearing an E sus4 for that very first chord, like that. I'm hearing that A in there. Just for a second, you hear it in there. Right? And then you hear the chords like twisting. And also the delay is kind of bouncing, which is really cool. And you kind of hear the repeats. Like that. But it's a E sus4 kind of into a C over E, like that. Just raise. Technically like a C sharp minor over E, back to that E5. So the chord twist right there is cool. And then there, back to that E5, like that. And then right there it's an F sharp, F major 7. And do the same thing with the delay, but an F major 7 to F5. And then an E sus4 again to an E5, and then just play the B and the high E open after that. And then do it again. Next up's the song Dancing on the Edge from the first Badlands album, and this is kind of an unusual beginning. It's got this muted, kind of quiet part, and it starts kind of evolving, and then once it gets going, it's like, yeah, that's so cool. But something like this. Really cool. So it starts with this palm muted kind of thing like that. right there, you're just palm muting the open A and that fretted A on the 7th fret on the D, just back and forth. Really interesting. And then chord hits. It's an A5 to an A flat 5, so that A and E flat. Like that, after you do the... and then you just kind of throw them in there. Like that. And then it's A sus4 to A major, like that. Right, so you're doing this kind of progression, but you're doing it like that. Cycles of that, then change this A note to a G, and now it's all implied, you know, A7 chords. So like an A7 to an A7 flat 5 implied, like that. And then A7 sus4 to A7. Right? So it's really interesting the way he's treating those chords. There, and then also there. Like there's some of Jake's, you know, stretchy moves right there. You know, that's really interesting. Back to the A cycle. Last time let that A ring, and then you hear everybody come in and then it starts rocking out, kind of using the same riff. So right there it's the same thing. Kind of bashing through those chords, so that A5 to A flat 5, A sus4 to A major, but like that. And then that little fill is really hard to kind of make out. That's what I came up with. That A, E, D, C sharp to D, and it goes right back into the riff. Really cool song. Once it gets going and unfolds, it opens up like a flower. Like, you know, man, that's so cool. Alright, last but not least is The Last Time, the opening track from the album Voodoo Highway, and this is really cool. It's not really that hard to play, but a cool riff like this. It's got that swampy kind of bluesy sound in the beginning. I believe it's played fingerstyle. He's also using like a tremolo kind of rotary effect. I opted not to use that, but there is like a rotary kind of tremolo effect like this. So it's like A5, and then you're grabbing that C up there. You're going to move that fretted part up to the 5th fret, and that's an implied A minor 7, like that. Like that. Up here, that's an implied A sus4. And then move that D down to C. And then right there back to that A minor 7. And you're kind of moving back and forth. Back to A. And that last time you're kind of picking through that A minor 7 a little different. And a little bit of D right there, like D over A. Hear this riff, you hear it kick in. So right there, the low E, that G to A, that C to D, and then B to G. And you're going to mimic the opening riff, but now with power chords and distorted. Like that. traditional kind of hard rock sound like that. Alright, that's going to wrap this episode of Chordplay with the Chords of Badlands. Definitely, Jakey Lee is a badass guitarist, a legend. And, definitely I've been a fan of his since I was a teenager, like a little kid, obsessed with Van Halen, started getting into Randy Rhoads, and then I noticed Jakey Lee, and I thought, man, he has this attitude and this, definite feel when he plays. There's so much energy and conviction. And, whether he's playing rhythm, he's playing a solo, or just a lick or a fill, he just puts everything into it. You can hear it, you can feel it. And definitely those early, Ozzy tours and albums and stuff like that are great. Badlands was a continuation of that. He's continued with Red Dragon Cartel. And definitely, he's been posting some things I've seen online, some interviews and just clips and stuff like that where he's talking about his music or he's talking about gear, breaks down some licks or some riffs or something like that. Definitely still active too. And I'd love, to see Jake, maybe kind of put together another group or continue with Red Dragon Cartel. I'm not really sure what the future holds, for Jake's career and his music. But definitely a very interesting and exciting player, very inspiring, and I've had lots of requests to feature more of his music. So hopefully this did the trick. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to Lessons, and I'll be back before you know with more content and material. Thank you.